Hello, hello. Welcome back to Mentally a Badass. I'm really excited to have Jessie Torres with us, a top ranked peak performance coach and life strategist with 18 years of experience. Jessie's helped thousands of high achievers around the world using her unique approach she calls Fierce Grace to turn pain into purpose. Today, we'll be chatting not just about her teachings, but also about her personal journey, what she went through to get here, and how her story can inspire you to tap into your own potential. So, welcome, welcome. So happy to have you today.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here. I appreciate it, Justine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, after I was reading your story, I was like, oh, we definitely have a lot to talk about. I was like reading the first two sentences. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, that was like my first thought. So, I would definitely like to bring that on to the podcast because, the whole point of Mentally a Badass is to bring those raw stories and to talk about it and to have those uncomfortable conversations, but then also talking about what you're doing today and to, give that beacon of hope to my listeners. So, can you share with us a bit about your early journey and the significant challenges you faced that have shaped you who you are today?
Sure. Thank you so much. So in the early days, what's interesting and what I've learned is that you don't know that you're in, right, a trauma response, right? You just don't know. You just go through life like I would not have known that my upbringing was having me live in a foundation of shame. I didn't know to call it shame. I didn't know to acknowledge that I thought I was damaged goods and dirty and no one would ever love me. Right? I didn't have that understanding because I went through this childhood abuse with my father. Right? I was just existing. You know what I mean? And so what I realized that in the context of serving others today, I see through a different set of lenses, right? I see through the lenses of love. I see through beauty, right? So when I look at people, I'm like, how do you not see how amazing you are, right? And I thought, well, but you didn't, Jessie. You didn't back then. All I could see was the lenses with which my belief system and my mindset were limited by. I only knew what I knew in the moment. And when you're in survival, all you think is get through the next day. You don't acknowledge your emotional state. You don't acknowledge your belief systems. You don't even know. So there's three levels to the tier of trauma. And before I dive in, I want to identify trauma because a lot of people think trauma is, like a big rape or something like that, which it is, of course. However, I've defined trauma as whatever the child made meaning of in the moment of the experience. Meaning a 5-year-old goes to the grocery store with his mom, plays in the aisle. Mom goes to the end of the aisle to grab something. She can see him, but he can't see her. Now he lifts his head up and says, Mom, screams for those 30 seconds that mom's like, I'm right here. He anchors abandonment. I could be left behind, right? And so in that moment now, next time mom goes to the grocery store, he's a little bit clingier, doesn't want her out of his sight. Right? Now he's 35 and wonders why he can't keep a relationship because he's controlling, possessive, and insecure. Right? And so we don't know to know that there's some form of limitation in your life today. There is a thread to a trauma moment where the human made a meaning around. And so that's what I'm committed to unpacking. I'm committed to unpacking. This isn't therapy. We're not going to lie in a chair. However, we are going to get curious. And we're going to find where that thread is, because one of the things I've noticed doing personal development now for over 20 years is that we are mindsetting our way out of healing. We understand personal development. We push through, we do affirmations, we shift our body, and we know the tools, and it gets us to a certain point. They are useful. However, we're not healing. And so then when we find ourselves stuck again, it invites a deeper level of disappointment and shame because, well, now I read the books. I went to the seminars. I know I'm doing positive affirmations, but it's not working, right? And so then we feel even worse about ourselves. So I'm committed to helping people see the unseen so that they never, ever unsee it. And they create a new normal moving forward.
That everything I was listening to definitely aligns with my beliefs. So I'm so excited for the rest of this conversation. And I literally have the same thought process. And I've been through so many different phases of healing where I'm just like, why isn't this working? And it's like you kind of have to like try different things, you know? Healing journey is not just like straight up. It's like back, forward, up, like, you know, it's like all the directions. And like I truly like, you know, I do believe in obviously like I do believe in therapy, I do believe in medicine, I do believe in like
Hmm.
whatever works for that person,
For sure.
because everybody is so different, and that's what's also the beauty of life. And what you were saying about trauma, I honestly am completely think the same way, is that when people think of trauma, they think like, oh, I was raped, or oh, this person got like murdered in front of me, or oh, it's like someone kidnapped me, which yeah,
Right.
it is trauma, absolutely. But yeah, what you were saying about the grocery store, I really like how you put that as an example, as like an abandonment issue like Rue.
Right.
And so when I listen to my guest, I think back like I kind of like analyze myself a little bit, and I'm like, it kind of like, you know, helps me too. And so I'm just like I like to put myself in people's position. And I'm like, yeah, it actually like makes a lot of sense. Like the mom could see them be like, okay, they're good. They're good. But then it's like their point of view, they're small. They can't see it. And then they're like,
Right.
Mom, where are you going? You know,
Yes.
or being lost in the store. That's
Hmm.
like everybody knows that one. And then all of a sudden you're just wandering like a little kid and just yada yada yada. And then you're like freaking out where mom is, or yeah. So that's
Right.
like they
Their
don't.
heartbeat. The other part too is their body is anchoring that contraction, that moment of like, oh my God, I could be left
Uh-huh.
behind, and in the scenario that I shared, there's no abuse, right?
Right.
There's no wrongdoing. You know what I mean? And so the mom doesn't think anything of it. It's just
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm right here, honey. It's okay. Come on, let's go. Right. But in the child, it's like I had an interesting question I spoken to a group of 80 women, and a lot of them moms, and we were talking about trauma, right? And how our trauma moments can also be the catalyst to resilience, to
Mm-hmm.
perseverance, right? This beauty, this other beauty on the other side. And a mom asked the question, she's like, so if the depth of our darkness, right? Because how I paint is the depth of our darkness is converse to the height of our light, right? So if we start to see those trauma moments as an opportunity to access a muscle we built, it's a whole different story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she's like, so if our children, we want to protect them from trauma, we want to protect them from, anything negative or dark or that's hurtful. How will they have that polarity, right? How will
Mm-hmm.
they have the lesson? And I said, don't worry about it. Life is going to do it for you. And here's the thing, right? Because we are all individual human beings.
Yeah.
Even though they're your children, they are a unique vessel, right? That
Mm-hmm.
create their own meaning. And just in the human experience will navigate their own challenges, like that little 5-year-old in the grocery store, right? Nobody knew, nobody taught him, right? It's just part of the human condition. We start to create meanings around our experience, and that nobody can fix, change, or, alter.
Yeah, and it's like you can't control like you, you can't control like what the universe, you know, throws at them. And
Hmm.
I like how you said that even though that person is your child, you can't expect them to think like you, be like you. Of course, naturally there's
Exactly.
going to be some personality traits that they're going to inherit
Right.
from you, but if you really think about it, it's like you have you and your, you know, your husband, significant other, whatever, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Mixed together, and then that just creates a completely different human experience. And like also side fun fact, I don't know if you ever done ancestry before, but when I did it, it was basically saying that like 90% of who you become is environmental base, and
Mm.
like the 10% or less is biological. And I saw that and I was like, that actually kind of makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean? And this is like one quick example I want to give you is me and my sister, we obviously we have the same parents, but she's 6 years older than me. So she
Hmm.
had a different experience with my parents versus like me. But some people
Right.
don't really connect that part. They think all they think is, oh, they're raised in the same household. Why are they so different? Why does one person have trauma, one person doesn't have the trauma, right? And then
Yep.
another thing too is we went to different schools growing up. So
Mm.
we did go to the same Catholic school. I was up until second grade, and then she was in eighth grade, so she graduated. And my mom didn't want to drive to that school anymore, so she took me out of that school and put me in a different school. And then in that school, I actually got severely bullied. but, which I don't
Oh
know.
no.
I know I'm like laughing about it. My therapist says I disconnect from my emotions. Anyway, I tend to laugh about when I talk about trauma. That's just kind of how I am. Anyway, so I got bullied there, and then so he, you know what I'm saying? Like even though we were brought up in the same household and we have similar, same DNAs and such, we've had totally different lives if you really
Yeah.
think about it. It's kind of
Mhm.
crazy. And then like right now I live in Florida, she lives in New Jersey where I'm from. It's like you wouldn't even think we're sisters at this point, right?
Well, it's the same thing. I have twins.
Oh,
Same
okay.
thing, right? So they're the exact same age,
Hmm.
born the exact same day, two totally different personalities, right? And they're identical. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like there you have, the example, of two people raised in the same home now actually at the same time, right? And so they're experiencing us as parents
Hmm.
at the same time, but
Hmm.
completely different.
Yeah, two completely different lens. It's insane. And I like love talking about this so people can be educated and be aware of that because a
Right.
lot of people don't think like don't think like that. So it's definitely very important that we talk about it. So I want to talk about I want to learn. It's a lot of it's a lot of learning, curious, and also I want you to talk to my listeners about it. So because there are women out there that do get abused by their husband emotionally and such, where they
Mhm.
may not even think it's abuse, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, well, he didn't hit me, right? But then when I
Right.
was reading your story, I was like, when you were saying it's like, yes, it's 100% emotional abuse and narcissism and controlling. So I want to talk a little bit about that. My biggest question is, how did you like? Can we talk about how you got out of it?
Sure, sure. Well, let's start with what it was, right?
Yes.
So I mentioned I had childhood abuse with my father.
Hmm.
I went from 18 years there
Hmm.
to 18 and a half years in a marriage, right? And before I dive in, I also just mentioned I kind of disclaim I don't, this isn't to vilify anybody. I
Hmm.
love my ex. I love my father. I am grateful for my entire journey because it made me who I am. Right.
Hmm.
So there's not anything I would change. It's just the contract I made with God before I got here. So that's how I see it. Right. So in that 18-year marriage, I got to a place of complete apathy where I was just, I only didn't take my own life because of my children, right? Because I didn't see a way out. This is how deepened my sadness and my disconnect had gotten. Because emotional, mental, verbal abuse to me, and all due respect for women that have actually physically been abused, please, Megan, I know that's terrible as well. But
Hmm.
the internal abuse that takes place, right? The internal, like you just, and I was like, I felt like I was in mini Vietnam. I'm trying to put out the fires or to make sure everything's perfect so there's no explosions to go off, right? And the explosions were verbally just mutilating, right? It's like every dark secret that you could possibly have used against you, right? On top of name calling and very vulgar language, right? So, but I didn't know. My dad, to a certain extent, was loud and he called us stupid and stuff. But this was another level, but in my nervous system, it was familiar. And I had only learned, well, this is what men do, right? So I didn't know, right? This is why I call it three pillars of trauma. There's
Hmm.
undiagnosed, there's unacknowledged, and there is unresolved, right? So the undiagnosed is I didn't know. I didn't have a diagnosis, right? So sometimes we don't know. We're like, no, I had a great upbringing. Parents are great. I have no abuse. I had great teachers, and we don't know. Like one of my clients who, a friend of the family's came over and told her that she'd never be as thin as her sister, so stop trying. And she probably won't be as successful. That friend of the family's, who isn't even in the family anymore, literally, she was 10 years old, dictated the rest of her life up until we started working together. She was massively depressed. She was fit as ever. I mean, her body rocked. Her life looked amazing, but her husband was ready to leave her because she wasn't actually present. She was so obsessed with being better than her sister. And then it turned into being better than every other woman. And then it turned into being better than herself, her version of herself last year. So she was so obsessed over trying to prove this statement at 10 years old wrong that she was exhausted and about to lose everything. Right. So we don't know. So in the context of that's undiagnosed, unacknowledged is someone that had a rape. So I know my abuse. I was raped, right? I let it go. I forgave. I'm good. The unacknowledged part is the pieces underneath the big trauma that we don't know to know, right? So now you don't know how to open to a partner, right? Because that your body contracts at physical touch, right? So there's a thing about handling the rape part, but there's so many other layers of emotional trauma that happen from our traumas that don't get acknowledged, right? Like my husband and I, when we got married, I was 18, he was 21. Okay, I came from sexual abuse, it being ignored, right? When I tried to tell my mom, my ex had an alcoholic mother who was brutally just abusive. She like beat his sisters unconscious. He'd come home from school and they'd be lying there unconscious on the floor. That's how bad it was. So when we got together, he's like, well, my kids will never see me drink. And I said, well, my kids will never be molested. And we thought we fixed it. We couldn't know to acknowledge all the other emotional trauma that we were bringing into that relationship, right? So now, unresolved, we're in it and we're just literally in our trauma bond, right? We're in this trauma triangle now, trying to have a marriage, trying to build a family. Yeah. And two young kids, 18, 21, they're like, we're going to have the white picket fence, the dog, the kids, right? And for the most part, we did it. But the internal madness that was going on was enough to kill my spirit. And I got to that place of complete apathy. And from apathy, it was an act of kindness that woke me up. I thought I had to die in the marriage. I thought that was my only way out. I had my own belief systems, how I was raised, and all of that. And my only way out was death. So either I'm going to die. I was willing somebody to blow the red light, or maybe he'll have an accident and then I could be the widow. And then I felt horrible thinking about that, like how, had guilt around that. So these people that acted kindly to me will never know. This is why I'm such an advocate for kindness, right? We're not helpless in a world that has a lot of crazy going on. Mm-hmm. Your one act of kindness can change the trajectory of someone's life like it did mine. Those people behaved in a way, it was a class that I took on the weekends, and I was very kept, very controlled. It was the first thing I was able to do on my own. And they acted kindly to me, and I didn't know. I call it a short circuit moment. They short circuited my brain. I'm like, I don't know what this feeling is. But if this feeling is available, then life is worth living. And every day, every Saturday when I went to that class, I came alive. And when I went home, I felt dead. And so from that moment, it gave me the courage to get out of my situation. And once I got out of my situation, it was explosive. And you talk about domestic violence, like it was explosive, which I think I read that today's Domestic Violence Day, actually, in honor of domestic violence.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, at that point, it got worse, right? Now it's like, what? You're going to leave me? Like once he realized I was serious, then it was hell on earth, right? So coming out of that, what I did, I realized that was gosh, how many years ago? Anyway, I won't do the math, but it was at the point where I was 38 years old and I didn't know who I was. I had no idea. I didn't even know what my favorite color was, what I like to eat. I didn't know because I had shape shifted into whatever I needed to be to keep the peace. And so from that, I'm like, how did I get here? So it created an insatiable hunger to understand humanity. And I started to read, I started to go to workshops, seminars, my own therapy. I started to dive deep into the human experience so that I can help others not have to live this way.
I should say, inside, part of me wanted to I'm like holding in my tears because I'm very empathetic. So I'm feeling your emotions right now. And I'm so happy that you're here and can provide your story. Majority of my audience are millennial women. So I probability wise is someone who may be going through what you went through. And then I like how you brought up the three different I think you said three different traumas.
Mm-hmm. Three different traumas.
Okay. Yes.
They're pillars. The three pillars. Yeah.
That's what it was. The three different pillars. Because I didn't even think about it like that. It's true. And it's like, you're thinking yourself like, okay, which pillar am I in? Like, and acknowledging that. And then, I asked you like, what was, like, when did you know was, like, how did you get out and such? So you said that it was a class and it pretty much like opened your mind. You're like, and you felt great. And then when you came home, you did not feel great. And that's when you're like, it clicked in your head and you're like, okay, I need to get out of here. you know,
Yes.
like you're like, I don't deserve this, I don't want to like be living like this. And then when you said that you, when you turned 38, you lost who you were, that's the part where I wanted to cry, because I'm like, that's
Mm.
horrible. I'm like, oh my goodness, like that's like, I'm so sorry I had to go through that. I think that's kind of like what I have to say right now,
Oh,
is
I
that like, I'm
appreciate
so
it.
sorry I had to go through that. But I'm so happy you're out of that. And I'm so happy that like what you're doing today. And it takes true courage to really get out of a situation like that. And so I want to talk about like when it happened. You said it was like all hell broke loose, right? Like I just want to ask, like, I hope that your ex didn't like do anything where he like, you know, like hit you or like I think my question is like, did you definitely had a lot of fear of what could have happened. So I
Yes,
guess like what I'm saying is that that could have been one of the biggest reasons why you didn't leave, right? Is that
very much.
you didn't know
Well,
what to
there was a
expect.
lot of different things, like, I came home from work and he told me he was on suicide hotline all day. And that,
Oh
and
no.
so he had suicidal thoughts, and and he had done this to me in our marriage at another time when he had this thing with this woman, right? So now he's like, oh, I just want to kill myself, I hurt the woman I love. And so there was always that kind of coercion, like that, made me go, oh, no, 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 it's okay, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you, let it go,
Oh
right?
man.
And so at this stage, though, this is the potency of kindness, right?
Hmm.
it's it short circuited me so much that it had me let go of any of that. When I came home from work after I told him that we were done, and he said he'd been on suicide hotline all day, I dug deep into my soul
Hmm.
to find something. And I want to tell you the love I had for this man. So I use the example of Titanic. Remember the movie?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the scene where Leo is putting her into the boat so she can get saved, and she's freaking out because he's not coming, and he's like, I got a boat on the other side, I'm good, but he knows he's not, going to be able to make it. And she's sitting there watching as the boat's going down, and he's up there, and she's like, and she can't take it, and she jumps out of the boat and back on the ship, and she goes running to him, and he's like, what? You're so stupid, Rose. Why did you do that? That's the kind of love I had for him. That's how
Yeah.
deeply, like, he was the first one that acknowledged the abuse with my father. To me, he loved me with all my dirty. That's what I interpreted. You love me anyway. Now that you know what I've been through with my father, I thought I was unlovable. Right. And
Yeah.
so I had this deep, deep love for him. And in this moment where he said he was on suicide hotline, I dug deep into my soul to find one thing, and I found nothing. And before, where that would have worked with me, I just looked at him and I said, you can't kill yourself. You have children. And I walked away. And I knew then that there's a specific threshold that gets crossed with women, just warning,
Hmm.
that once it's crossed, it's a point of no return. And from that moment, I knew that this was complete, it was done, and I didn't wish him any harm, but I was not going to stay a prisoner because of his decisions any longer. And so one of the things I want your audience to know is that there is a deeper resolve in you that you don't know yet. And right now, you might be in fear. You might be, but you don't understand, Jesse. You don't know my situation. You don't know how angry he gets. You don't know how he has all the money. Whatever the heck the story is, there is a deeper courage in you that you just haven't met yet. In the moment that you choose you, in the moment that you say, you know what? You aren't choosing me because I'm not choosing me. And from this day forward, I choose me and my life. Because if I'm going to live, I need to be able to live with joy, with expansion. Being a woman is one of the greatest gifts in the world.
Hmm.
But you can't be when you're molding yourself into being everything you need to be to have a good day. I remember moments where I was like, where he was in a good mood, and I was just like, if you could just stay like this, then I could connect with you, I could be intimate, and then inevitably something would happen, and then I'm contracting, and now I was called a nun, or maybe I got early menopause, or what's wrong with you, why don't you want to be intimate? I'm just like, you just called me all these names, I don't even, you know what I mean? And so it's that kind of thing. So just know that in the moment when I made the decision, I didn't know the hell that was coming. And some of the hell was he was making death threats. He was making death threats to my boss, um, to my teacher. You know, I slept on the church at Grace Baptist Church at parking lot just to not go home. My kids were, I have twin boys. My boys were 17 and a half and my daughter was 15. I mean, the trauma, you know what I mean? Like, because he did
Mhm.
everything you're not supposed to do, right? He
Yeah.
put them in the middle. He would say vulgar things about me the minute I walked out the door. And so it was just so bad that I just didn't want to go home because it would invite another barrage of vulgar words, right? So, but again, it's like you don't know what you've got until your knees hit the floor oftentimes. And so I want you guys to know that you are strong enough. You matter enough to take a stand for you. And if you have children, remember, they don't do what we tell them, they do what we show them. If you want strong children, then don't tell them what to do. Be the adult you want them to become. And I promise you, it will make a massive difference in who they get to be.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask the question in regards to, children and such, and I'm gonna ask it anyway. So some women may not want to leave because they fear that like a divorce would, hurt their children, or they're just scared, I guess, they'll lose their children. When the children are involved, it's definitely a lot harder for women to leave their abuser.
Mhm.
So how did that go about with you?
How
Like,
did
was
it
it?
go?
Yeah. I guess my question is like this. I guess a transition, or like, I guess my question is if, let's say, well, I'm not a mother or anything like that, but let's say I'm a mother and I have kids and I have the abusive husband. I'm scared to leave him because what if I lose my children? Or like, how is this going to affect my children? Like, all these thoughts go through your head. So my question is like, did you go through that? And like, how did you overcome that?
So, yes and no. So, for years, I did. I didn't want to be the home wrecker,
Hmm.
right? I didn't want to be the one that I felt it was selfish. Ooh, I have to choose me, and everybody's going to suffer. And for a while, it felt like that. But what we don't realize in our undiagnosed trauma is that our children are suffering while you're in the marriage, because
Hmm.
this is what they're learning relationship is. This is what they're learning a woman does. This is what they're learning a man does. And this is what they will attract. Right? Even my daughter and I, who had conversations around this, and she would say, I want to, make sure that I make the right choices. There was still an essence of her dad that came with her husband, who a boyfriend that turned into a husband. Even though we knew, right? Because again, the nervous system records and it feels familiar. So when you ask yourself, like, stay together for the kids, it's like, unless your relationship is something that you both want and want to work on, then if you're in suffering, if you're in abuse, then that your children are suffering. It just doesn't look like it because you're constantly cleaning up the mess. You're constantly re-putting on your makeup. You're constantly wiping your eyes and trying to hide yourself from the kids that you're crying. You're trying to be the middle person and shielding them from the pain, but they are in it. They see it. They're not. I mean, some of the stuff my children reminded me of, that they remember, oh, I remember this argument, mom, and I remember that. They are in it. So you think you're saving them, you're not. So I get it, but start knowing again how much you matter and start devising a plan. Start looking, and actually at the end of this, I have a 10 step, I call it 10 steps to freedom. And it's a
Hmm.
little guide that I'm going to give to your listeners as just a free gift. And in there, it starts to tell you things that you can do, no matter what your situation. You can start taking action right now and start developing a plan. But the first thing, ladies, you must believe that you're worthy of the life that you dream of. You have to have that resolve. Part of the reason we stay in it is because we don't believe we're worthy of more, right? We don't
Hmm.
believe that, well, what will I do? Who will I go? Who will love me? I'm a train wreck. I don't even know how to pay bills. He handles all the money. Whatever the heck the story is, trust that you have a deeper resilience, you have creativity, you have curiosity, you have courage, you have all of that in you that you just haven't accessed because you haven't taken the step. And I implore you, take it. You are worthy of it and you matter.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. And then also, I will. So you're gonna give me like, I guess, like a link or something that
Yes,
I can give
it's
my
a link.
listeners. Okay, cool. After we get off, I'll ask you for that because I'll start promoting it before this episode goes out because that's beautiful. That's awesome.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just so I have that, I could put it like in the mentally badass story and such. Because it would take a couple of weeks for this episode to come out. But
Okay.
remind me. Okay,
Okay.
so let's talk about your program, Fierce Grace. Can we talk about like an overview of it?
Sure. Sure. So Fierce Grace, I'm super proud of it. I have done a couple of renditions of it because in my 20 years of research and study, you pick up things from different teachers and mentors. I've not only worked for Tony Robbins for 7 years, so I got to work with people all over the world, but I've
Oh,
also apprenticed with
Tony
a shaman
Robbins.
for over a year. I've become a trainer for the Institute of Heart Math. I have tons of training. And so initially, what my Fierce Grace program was, it was a combination of my training. What Fierce Grace is now is a product and the muscle I built in my journey. What was it that I did coming from a complete place of apathy and shame to loving life and living vibrantly, right? And I think of all the things, right? And we haven't even discussed my brothers yet, who were both murdered 30 years apart.
Mhm.
Like when I think about it, it's weird because now I have this. I see Jessie over here, right, and I'm over here. I'm going, damn, girl, you went through some stuff, right?
Yeah.
But my outcome here is that if I can go through that and be where I am today, so can you. And I'm committed and devoted to helping people get from their pain and alchemize it into something beautiful, turn it into power so that you can live a vibrant life, so that you can activate your business and move forward to catalyze your business to the next level, because our business is a reflection of our mental capacity to move through and have more. Right. So Fierce Grace is a 12-week program, and it's 10 weeks of modules and training and 2 weeks of integration, because it's not about just learning new information. We have to learn how to integrate it and create a new normal. And
Mhm.
so it's literally, how do we take whatever limitation we have today, whatever it is that's stopping us, whether it's lack of confidence, whether it's, I'm exhausted all the time, I'm burnt out, I'm tired, whatever that thing is. What is it that's limiting you? Because my belief is that there's no limitation to the human being, only the belief that there is one. So what is that? Let's look at it. Let's get to that undiagnosed trauma, and let's
Mhm.
peel back the onion and let's see what's there. Because what's not taught in personal development right now, you'll hear coaches say your past doesn't equal your future. Well, I disagree. I believe your past can equal your future. We're just not taught to seek the muscle it gave us. Right? You have a rape and you're like, oh, I don't ever want to think about it again. I don't ever want to go back there. My past, I don't want to live in unworthiness, blah, blah, blah. True. However, you're still here. So what I see is someone who persevered. I see someone with mass resilience. I see someone who still got back up and decided to be kind. Right? We are not taught to see that. And I always say, go back. And, if you don't look for the gift in your pain or trauma, then you will only remember the pain. So what's the other story? Let's find that, and let's find your magnificence, right? Let's unpack it. Let's bring you back to sovereignty. Let's understand the three pillars of emotional intelligence, which is emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, and emotional fitness, right? It's not enough just to know. You have to be able to practice it and consistently acknowledge that. So that's the program. We get you to a place of sovereignty where you understand that life is not happening to you. It's happening for you, but not even for you. It's also from you, right? And from
Mhm.
that, we can get into the energetics of the physical body and what we attract as we vibrate based on our heart and mind coherence, which is a whole nother level of training. But it's all in there. And again, my outcome is to help you take whatever pain you've been through and alchemize that sucker, transcend it into power and beauty.
I love that. And one thing I want to mention that I love that you validated, saying that when people say, "Oh, your past is not your future," but it's like, yeah, like it is technically because you can't like disregard everything that happened to you,
Right.
especially as a
Mm-hmm.
child, because
Yeah.
stuff that happened to you as a child is part of what happened to today. We're not saying it's going to like we're gonna just ignore it and bring it on and have a bad future, but we need to acknowledge it and we need to
Mm-hmm.
figure out like what is giving us like those limited beliefs, like what is like for like triggers, like with mental health, like with triggers, like like for me that I'm working on, if I get triggered, I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, why am I triggered? Why is this making me so mad? Right. And one
Mm-hmm.
thing that actually I've realized myself is that I get triggered when like something's not fair or injustice or people are not heard. Like my mom always say, oh, you're like that because your name's Justine, so it's justice and this and that, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that I think because when I was going through bullying, and my mom told the principal, we all were like in this like meeting with me, the bully, and the the two moms, my mom and her mom. I had injustice. I went through injustice because I was a new kid, and then that family was like well respected in the community. So I was pretty much called a liar, and it
Mm.
never like so the school didn't do anything, and so I had to leave. I
Wow.
had to leave the school because I wasn't protected by the school. And me and my mom were just like, I can't stay in the school being constantly bullied. Like I was losing my will to live at the age of like 10 years old. So
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's not good. So like I think this is all recent too. Like a couple weeks ago, I realized I sat down. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense why I get so angry. Like I just build up with so much anger. And I even like told my therapist, like, why am I such an angry person? You know what I mean? I'm like, why am I so angry? Like you wouldn't even think that just because my personality is very bubbly and such. But
Mm-hmm.
I get very angry, very like, not all the time. But my point is like
Right.
it's not all the time, it's certain things. So that's like a kind of an I guess somewhat of an example for what you're saying is just like there's some things in your past that you just need to work on in order to be literally your best self in order to help
Yeah. And
people. Yeah.
what I would say to that, Justine, if I may,
Hmm.
um, it's a part of you because our triggers are honestly our friend. Our
Okay.
triggers, are, like you, right, is an opportunity to see what part of our inner child or our wounding needs our love, right? Because
Mm.
she's still activated. She's like, oh, she's like, oh, I'm just, oh, no, drives me crazy, right? And then she's like barking, like she's taking the wheel over Justine. She's just like, no, I'm driving now. That's not fair. And you know what? I'm going to be a stand and I'm going to, come on, I'll take you down, right? Right. And so that part of you is needing your love. She's still activated, right? And so she's still believing the bully's present, right? And the bully
Mm.
shows up in injustice, or it shows up in a boss, or it shows up in a best friend, or whatever. So yeah, that part is still barking. So she's the one that needs your love. And so, because again, that's the unresolved trauma, right? The
Yeah.
unresolved part that she's still there, even though right? And you're like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, I was bullied, and right? But there's all
Yeah.
these other little threads that are still there that activate her. I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
Because in my marriage, that's what it was. I was basically bullied for 18 years, right? With the verbal, the mental, the coercion, all that stuff. I went on a trip to Costa Rica with some friends, and these were new friends to me. They decided they were going. They had this whole trip planned with a group of people. And at the last minute, invited me, and I was like, "Sure, go to Costa Rica for this meditation retreat, whatever." All right. So I went, and it was a group of about, I want to say, maybe 25 people. Okay, and I didn't really know anybody except my two friends, right? And so there was a lady there who called herself the shaman, right?
Hmm.
And she was like offering massages and energy work and all this stuff to the ladies. But what I noticed is that she was very sharp with them. And I was like, oh, wow, like, but who am I to judge? I don't know this group and da da da, right? So I was just keeping my mouth shut. But I was watching to the point where at one point we had a circle and there was a speaker there, and he said some things to one of the ladies, and the lady had this big breakthrough. And she literally whispered to her, I heard her, she said, see, we could have had that breakthrough if you would have joined my program. And like literally shamed her. And she was just like, oh, I'm sorry, And I was like, wow, like it's interesting that she's the so-called shaman of this group, right?
Yeah.
So we're going through all of this. Now we're at dinner, and we got half the table sitting over there and half the table over here. And I'm sitting here with my two friends, and they keep talking about these documents they're sending around. And I'm like, where are these documents you guys are sharing? And they're like, oh, it's in the group chat. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't think I was ever added to the group chat because I'm not getting any of these messages. And so the friend here, she stands up and she waves her phone and she says, hey, everybody, I want to let you know, I'm going to add Jessie to the group, just so you guys know. And this table over here said, well, whoa, 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 wait a minute. No, like, and this shaman lady, she was sitting on the other end of the room. And they were like, well, no, you can't just add her like that. Like, we have to vote. And, there's certain members that aren't here and they need to have a vote on it, and I'm sitting there going, It's totally fine, you know. And she's like, you guys aren't trusting my judgment. This is not okay. And they're literally getting into this battle as I'm in the middle. And I'm like, hey, I don't need to be on this freaking group chat. Forget about it. You know what I mean? And they're going back and forth. And then the other friend is like, hey, this is my deal. I put this together. We're doing this. She's getting on the, and so they're having this argument. The shaman lady, she stood up and she literally said, sit the F down. Like she literally just sit the F down. This is not your show. Stop talking. And everything in my body boiled to like a point where I was going to say to her, you sit the F down, right? But I caught it. To your point, I was triggered.
Yeah.
And I didn't know at the moment, I couldn't diagnose it, right? I just knew everything in my body got hot. I felt the vibration come up to my body and I stood up and I said, ladies, I love you all. I am massively triggered right now. I'm going to leave. And I called it out and I walked out the door and they did whatever. And then as I was walking, I was like, to like your question, I'm like, what the frick just happened? Why did that create such a reaction in me? And I realized it's because I had been watching her kind of bully these ladies for all these days. And then when she stood up and did that and fired, I was like, oh, hell no. And I was going to get my fist up, you know what I mean? But that's not me either.
Yeah.
Right. So I always call the pendulum, right? When we're people pleasers and we've been stomped on our whole lives, where we live on this side of the pendulum. And then when we figure out we don't want to be stomped on anymore, we go to this side of the pendulum. We're like, oh, hell no. But that's not our truth either. We're somewhere in the middle. We're somewhere in the middle where we can still be kind and we can set boundaries, right? And take a stand. And at that point, I realized, oh, that's because she was behaving like the bully. And that's what it triggered in me. And I got to love on that part. Right. And I was able to catch it in time to not react from it. Right. So then I got to love on those pieces. So that's why I share that with you. Like that little girl in there, she's still fighting. She's fighting hard.
Yeah, that was crazy. And as you were talking about that, I was like thinking like, yeah, it is like that boiling feeling and then like not realizing it's like and then when that was happening to me before I knew like the knowledge that you were talking about right now, I would get so mad at myself. I would get so angry at myself. And I'm like, why am I like this? I was always like, why am I like this? But then
Yeah.
that's what kind of goes back to everything we're just talking about on this episode is where like this is all you didn't know, and
That's
it's
right.
okay that I didn't have the knowledge on that. I'm learning, like literally living life. It's just like a learning experience. And then you just get knowledge from like everybody that you associate yourself with, which is also a very beautiful thing. Like right now, we met each other through a platform and now we're
Right.
talking and I'm learning so much from you. And that's the one thing I really love about being a host on a podcast is that I have people from all over the world, different walks of life, telling their stories, giving their knowledge. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. So what I want to end with, and usually what I do end with, is like if there's a last piece of advice that you would like to provide my audience, it can really be anything, but what's something that's kind of like that's going through your head that you just want to like leave with for today?
I said it already, but
Mhm.
that you matter, that you are important and you matter enough to be a stand for. Now, my hunch is your listeners are easily a stand for their children. They're easily a stand for their friends. They're easily a stand for their family members that they love, but maybe not so much with themselves. And just know that not only do you matter, you're part of the whole, right? If we want to talk quantum physics and get into that conversation, it's a whole nother conversation, but you are a human being. So how you behave matters to the whole. So it matters not just to your children. It matters not just to your family. It matters not just to the Starbucks lady. It matters to me. It matters to Justine. Because if you're a woman that's in suffering, there's a frequency out there in the quantum that we all connect with that suffering. And I believe the leaders of tomorrow are the most authentic and the most empowered woman, because we need to bring the feminine back. The pendulum has swung far too much to the masculine, even in our own right as women. We fought so hard to prove we could do it all that we've kind of tipped the scale a little bit, right? We're amazing and we're powerful and we can do it all, but do we want to? I don't want to kill my own bug. I don't want to open my own jar. Just freaking do it for me. You know what I mean? Open my door. Like I know I can, but do I want to? And so our men are confused, right? They're like, should I
Yeah.
help you with the groceries or will I be insulting you? Don't know anymore. What's the right thing, right? And trust me, I've had my sons experience some really harsh moments with some women that call out, I'm in my masculine, so you need to be more masculine than me. Tell me to shut the F up or something. Like, what? That's what it takes for you to enter your feminine? My son came home
Right.
confused. He's like,
Yeah.
Mom, should I have? And I'm like, no. I said, first of all, how sad is it that that's what she thinks she needs in order to step into her feminine?
Right.
And number two, you tell her if that's what she needs from her partner, you're not her man. Because
Yeah.
that is a volatile situation. If she's believing she needs to be talked to that way in order to soften, she's got a whole nother world of trauma that he is not there to mend,
Right.
you know? But so again, coming back to you ladies, you matter. You are important to everyone that you come in contact with, and you are important enough to take action for. Love yourself enough, right? And if you're having a hard time finding that self-love, then love your children, love your family, love us enough to step in and take a stand for yourself like you would others. Because that human spirit is, it's unmatched by anything. It defies all the odds. It's what has a stay-at-home mom lift a Volkswagen off a child. That's the power you each possess. You just don't know it. So trust that it's there. Adjust your belief systems. Believe that you can have a different life, and you will.
Love that. Thank you so much for coming on here,
Absolutely.
Jessie. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. So, for all my listeners, thank you guys for listening and stay tuned for next week's episode. Okay, click stop.